smoke didn't smell like burning wood. It tasted like melting plastic and the copper tang of blood thick enough to choke on. At exactly 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday in late November, Isolde Merrick had 3 seconds to make a choice that would end her life as she knew it. The roof of Oak Hollow Animal Shelter groaned like a dying beast. Support beams snapped with the sharp crack of rifle fire, unable to hold the weight of the inferno consuming them from above. The exit was 5 feet away. Just 5 feet. A straight shot to the cold Wyoming night, to the snow-dusted air that promised survival, that whispered the word she'd been chasing for 3 years: escape. But behind her, trapped beneath a fallen steel crate, a gray-furred wolf pup whined. His back leg was crushed at an angle that made Isolde's veterinary training scream in alarm. His eyes, impossibly amber and far too intelligent for any ordinary animal, locked onto hers with a terror that looked almost human. Isolde Merrick didn't run for the door. She turned back into the fire. She didn't know the pup was a prince. She didn't know that dying tonight, right here in this forgotten corner of the Montana-Wyoming border, was the only way she would ever truly live. She didn't know that in exactly 4 minutes, an Alpha King would find her broken body and make a choice that would rewrite the fate of 12 territories. All she knew was that something in those amber eyes reminded her of herself. Trapped, terrified, certain that no one was coming, Isolde Carmichael. Izzy, to the few people who bothered to learn her name before she changed it, wiped a smear of grease from her cheek and checked the clipboard hanging by the kennel door one last time. The Oak Hollow Animal Sanctuary was quiet tonight, save for the industrial heater's mechanical hum and the occasional shuffle of paws against cold concrete. It was a bitterly cold night, the kind of Wyoming winter that froze your breath in your lungs before you could exhale it, that turned the ghost pine forest into a cathedral of ice and shadow. Izzy adjusted her oversized cardigan, pulling it tighter around her too-thin frame. At 24, she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the double shifts or the student loans from a veterinary degree she'd had to abandon in her 3rd year. It was a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that came from spending 3 years looking over your shoulder, from changing your name and burying your past and pretending that if you stayed invisible enough, stayed small enough, the people you were running from would forget you existed. She'd been wrong about that, but she wouldn't know it for another 8 minutes. "Last check, little guy," she whispered, kneeling in front of cage number 7. Inside sat the newest arrival. The intake forms labeled him a stray mixed breed found wandering the service road near the National Forest boundary. But Isolde knew better. She had grown up around dogs, had spent enough time in veterinary clinics to recognize the difference between domestic and wild. This animal was different. He was too large for a 6-month-old pup. His paws were massive, built for a body that would one day stand taller than any wolf she'd seen in the wildlife rehabilitation cases she'd studied. His fur was slate gray, the color of storm clouds, and it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it was his eyes, those piercing amber eyes, ancient and intelligent, that unnerved her. He didn't bark. He didn't whine or scratch at the cage door like the others did when she made her rounds. He just watched her, his gaze tracking her movements with an awareness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "You're a weird one, aren't you?" she murmured. In 3 years of working here, she'd learned that lesson over and over. Animals came and went. People came and went. The only constant was the cold and the silence and the careful routine that kept her invisible. The pup let out a low huff, a sound that was almost conversational, and rested his chin on his oversized paws. His eyes never left her face. Isolde stood stretching her back until her spine popped in 3 places. She walked toward the front office to log out, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The clock on the wall read 11:40 p.m. 2 minutes. She had 2 minutes before her world ended. The sanctuary was an old converted barn on the edge of the ghost pine forest, isolated enough that the rent was cheap, and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles down a dirt road that turned to mud every spring. It was a fire hazard waiting to happen. The wiring was older than Isolde. The sprinkler system hadn't been serviced in a decade, and the owner had stuffed the storage room with supplies that included industrial oxygen tanks for the occasional wildlife rehab case. Isolde had filed 3 safety complaints in the past year. All 3 had been ignored. The explosion wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow, a fist of heat and pressure that picked Isolde up and threw her into the reception desk like a rag doll. Glass shattered, raining down on her in a hail of jagged diamonds that sliced through her cardigan and bit into her skin. For a moment, there was only ringing silence, a high-pitched whine in her ears that drowned out everything else that made the world feel distant and unreal. Then came the heat. It wasn't a slow build, wasn't the gradual warmth of a campfire or the comfortable radiance of a space heater. This was instant, suffocating, a wall of superheated air that turned her lungs into furnaces. The blast had originated in the storage room where the oxygen tanks were kept. Within seconds, the dry old timber of the barn was consumed, the fire racing through the structure structure like a living thing, hungry and merciless. Isolde coughed, her brain struggling to catch up with reality. The air had turned into thick black soup, oily and choking. Fire, she croaked the word barely audible over the roar of the flames. The dogs. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp pain in her left shoulder, where she'd hit the desk, ignoring the warm trickle of blood running down her temple. The hallway was already a tunnel of orange and red, the flames licking up the walls and across the ceiling. The ancient sprinkler system sputtered once, coughed out a pathetic spray of water, and died. Get out. The voice in her head was pure survival instinct, the same voice that had kept her alive for 3 years. Run, live, that's what you do. That's all you've ever done. She stumbled toward the exit, the heat blistering, singing the fine hairs on her arms. She could see the night sky through the blown-out front doors, could feel the kiss of cold air on her face. Safety, life, freedom. Then she heard it. A howl. It wasn't a dog's bark or a frightened whimper. It was a sound that vibrated in her chest, mournful and terrifying, impossibly loud, but over the roar of the fire. It came from the back of the building. From cage number 7, Isolde stopped. Her hand was on the doorframe. The fresh air hit her face so cold it burned, promising everything she'd wanted for 3 years. No more running, no more hiding, just survival, just escape. If she went back, she wouldn't make it out. The roof was already sagging, the structural beams groaning under the thermal assault. She could hear them cracking, could see the ceiling starting to bow. He's just a stray, her survival instinct argued. You're a person. You matter. Go. Isolde looked at the snow outside, clean and white and infinite. Then she looked back into the hellscape of the hallway, into the smoke, in the flames, and the certain death waiting for her. She remembered those amber eyes. She remembered the way he'd pressed his head against the wire mesh of the cage earlier that evening, when she'd been sitting in the office crying over the stack of bills she couldn't pay, over the student loan statements that kept finding her no matter how many times she moved. He'd watched her cry, and then he'd made that same huffing sound, as if to say, I see you. You're not alone. No one had seen her in 3 years. Not really. She'd made herself invisible on purpose, had chosen isolation because it was safer than being found. But this pup, this strange creature with the 2 intelligent eyes, had seen her. Damn it, Isolde screamed into the smoke. She turned around. She ran back into the fire. The smoke was blinding now, a living darkness that swallowed the beam of her flashlight. Isolde pulled her cardigan up over her nose and mouth, dropped to her hands and knees to stay below the worst of the fumes. The heat was unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on her, making every breath a conscious effort. Her eyes streamed tears, her lungs burned, her skin felt like it was cooking. She reached the kennel block. Most of the cages were open, their latches warped by the heat, and the other animals had bolted through the hole the explosion had torn in the back wall. But cage number 7 was crushed. A heavy support beam, easily 400 pounds of solid wood, had fallen at an angle, pinning the metal door shut. Inside, the pup was thrashing, biting at the metal bars, his fur singed. When he saw Isolde, he stopped. He looked at her, and for a second, the panic in his eyes was replaced by something else. Recognition. I've got you, Isolde choked out. She grabbed the hot metal of the cage door with both hands. It burned immediately, the skin on her palms blistering and peeling, but adrenaline numbed the worst of it. She pulled. The door didn't budge. The beam was too heavy, the angle too steep. The section of roof directly above them gave a warning crack. Sparks showered down, igniting the straw bedding scattered across the concrete floor. Flames licked closer to the cage. Come on, Isolde screamed at herself, at the universe, at whatever God might be listening. She planted her feet, grabbed the metal again, and pulled with everything she had. The metal groaned but didn't move. She needed leverage. Her eyes landed on a heavy-duty mop handle mounted on the wall, industrial steel, designed to withstand years of hard use. She grabbed it, jammed the end into the gap between the cage door and the frame, and threw her entire body weight against it like a lever. The metal shrieked. The beam shifted half an inch. Not enough. Isolde screamed again, a sound of pure rage and desperation, and heaved. Something in her shoulder gave way with a wet pop, but she didn't stop. The door popped open with a tortured squeal of metal on metal. Go, Isolde shouted, reaching in and grabbing the pup by the scruff of his neck. He scrambled out, stumbling on his injured back leg, nearly falling. He looked at the hole in the wall where the other animals had fled, then looked back at Isolde. Run, you idiot, she yelled, her voice breaking. She coughed violently, her lungs spasming, struggling to find oxygen in air that had none. The smoke was too thick, too heavy. Her vision was tunneling gray, creeping in at the edges. The pup didn't move. He grabbed the sleeve of her cardigan with his teeth and tugged, trying to pull her toward the exit. Isolde tried to take a step. Her legs felt like lead, distant and unresponsive. She fell to her knees, the impact barely registering through the haze of oxygen deprivation. The roof above gave its final mournful creak, the sound of inevitability. Go, she whispered, her hand falling on the pup's head. Her vision was fading fast, the world narrowing to a pinpoint. She could hear her heartbeat slowing, could feel her body shutting down system by system. The pup howled again, a sound of pure devastation, and refused to leave her side. Isolde looked up. Through the smoke, she could see a massive section of the loft breaking free timbers, the size of telephone poles, all of it coming down directly over them. She didn't have the strength to move away. She barely had the strength to breathe, but she had the strength to move him. With the last ounce of energy in her body, Isolde threw herself over the wolf pup. She curled her body around him, creating a human shield, her back to the falling debris. She heard the roar of the timber as it fell, felt the impact shudder through the building. Then there was pain, sharp and absolute, as 400 pounds of burning wood crashed across her spine. She felt something break, felt her legs go instantly numb. Her lungs tried to draw breath and found nothing but smoke and agony. The world didn't go black. That would have been a mercy. Instead, it went cold in. A strange, distant cold that started in her extremities and crept inwards, shutting down everything it touched. She could hear the pup whimpering beneath her, could feel his small body trembling alive and whole because of the cage her body had made. Run, little king, she whispered, though she didn't know why she said it, didn't know where the words came from. Her vision was fading to white now, not black. Everything was going quiet. Her heart stuttered. Once, twice, stopped. Isolde Merrick died at 11:47 p.m. in a burning barn in the middle of nowhere. Her body broken and her last breath given to save a creature she didn't even know was royalty. She would be dead for 90 seconds. It would be enough to change everything. 3 miles away, Theron Ashford was driving his Aston Martin DBX far too fast for the icy roads. His knuckles were white on the leather steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The dashboard clock read 11:48 p.m., and every second that passed felt like a small death. He was the Alpha King of the Western Territories, sovereign of the largest and most lethal werewolf pack in North America, commanding 12 allied territories that spanned 3 states. His word was law. His power was absolute. Alpha's twice his age bowed when he entered a room, but tonight he wasn't a king. He was a terrified brother. Where is he? Theron growled into the Bluetooth system, his voice dropping an octave as the wolf inside him clawed at his throat, demanding to be let out, demanding blood. The voice on the other end was calm, irritatingly so. Cade Brennan, his second in command, and the closest thing Theron had to a friend, spoke with the precision of someone who understood that panic helped no one. The tracking beacon on the young heir's collar came back online 3 minutes ago, Alpha. He's at the old Oak Hollow shelter, coordinates transmitted. But Theron, the vitals monitor is spiking. Heart rate over 200 beats per minute. Elevated stress hormones. He's in immediate danger. I'm 2 miles out, Theron said, his voice barely human now. The wolf was so close to the surface that his vision had already started to shift colors, bleeding away into the enhanced spectrum of the predator. Gold bled into his peripheral vision. Kieran, his younger brother, had been missing for 22 days. The ransom demands had been silent, which meant this wasn't about money or negotiation or any of the civilized games that packs sometimes played. This was an assassination. Someone wanted the Ashford bloodline ended, wanted Theron's 11-year-old brother dead, wanted the succession broken so they could tear apart the Western Alliance and claim the territories for themselves. Kieran was only 11 years old, a child who hadn't even shifted into his human form yet, trapped in his wolf pup body because the trauma of the abduction had locked him there, unable to make the transformation that should have been as natural as breathing. Theron rolled down the window, ignoring the freezing wind that tore through the car's interior. He needed to smell the air, needed to use every sense he had. And then he caught it faint but unmistakable smoke. But underneath the smoke, something else. The scent of burnt pine and ozone and blood. Royal blood. No, Theron roared. He slammed the accelerator to the floor. The SUV fishtailed on a patch of black ice before the tires found purchase and launched the vehicle forward like a missile. He rounded the final bend and saw the orange glow lighting up the night sky. The Oak Hollow shelter was an inferno, flames reaching 30 feet into the air, the old barn structure collapsing in on itself with the inevitability of entropy. Theron didn't wait to park. He drifted the car into a snowbank, kicked the door open with enough force to tear it half off its hinges, and sprinted toward the burning building. Every instinct screamed at him to shift, to let the wolf out, to use the superior speed and strength of his animal form. But shifting took seconds he didn't have, and in this fire his human form was smaller, better for navigating debris. He could smell his brother now, the scent cutting through the smoke with the clarity of a bell. Alive. Still alive. Kieran, he bellowed, his voice booming with the alpha command, a tone that carried the weight of absolute authority that forced submission and attention from every wolf within hearing range. No answer came. Theron kicked through the shattered front doors. The heat was intense enough to blister human skin in seconds, but alphas were built differently. Their bone density was triple that of humans, their healing factor capable of repairing damage almost as fast as it occurred, their tolerance for pain and temperature extremes far beyond anything a human body could endure. But even he couldn't survive this for long. He tracked the scent following the invisible thread of his brother's presence through the maze of fire and smoke. He moved through the hallway, one arm shielding his eyes from the worst of the heat. The building groaned around him, dying. He found the kennel block. It was a ruin, the roof collapsed and the center support beams scattered like broken bones. Theron scanned the wreckage, his enhanced vision cutting through the smoke. There, a gray snout poking out from beneath a pile of smoldering timber. Kieran Theron fell to his knees, ignoring the burning embers that bit into his jeans, into his skin. He grabbed the heavy timber that covered his brother. It weighed at least 400 pounds, probably closer to 5. With a snarl of exertion, every muscle in his body straining, veins popping in his neck, Theron heaved it aside. He threw it like it was made of cardboard, sent it crashing into what remained of the far wall. What he saw stopped his heart. Kieran was alive. He was scorched, his gray fur singed in places, his amber eyes wide with terror and trauma. But he was breathing. He was whole, but he wasn't alone. Curled around him, her back a horrific tapestry of burns and blood, was a human woman. She was motionless, her body having taken the brunt of the impact when the beam fell. The timber Theron had just thrown aside had been resting directly across her spine. She had put herself between the falling debris and a wolf pup she had no reason to believe was anything more than an animal. She had died protecting his brother. Theron froze, his world narrowing to the woman's still form. And then a scent hit him so powerful and pure that it cut through the smoke and the char and the death, so compelling that it triggered something primal and absolute in his hindbrain. Wild sage and winter rain, clean and sharp and impossible to ignore. Mate. The word echoed in his mind, spoken in a voice that wasn't quite his own, that came from the deepest part of him, the part that was pure wolf, pure instinct. The mate bond was supposed to be a myth, a romantic story that Pax told to explain why some wolves form permanent pair bonds. But Theron felt it snap into place like a lock turning, like a key finding its home. This human woman, this stranger who was broken and dying in a burning building, was his mate. She had sacrificed herself for his brother. She was fragile, human, powerless. And she had thrown herself into fire to save a wolf. Kieran, move? Theron ordered, his voice trembling with an emotion he couldn't name. The pup limped aside, whimpering, his injured back leg dragging. Theron scooped the woman up as gently as his shaking hands would allow. She was limp, her skin fever hot from the flames, but somehow also cold, that terrible cold of a body shutting down. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, wet-sounding her heartbeat, a fluttering bird thing, irregular and fading fast. Her heart stopped. Theron felt it through the bond, felt the moment her heart gave its last beat and went still. 90 seconds. She had been dead for 90 seconds already. Don't you dare, Theron whispered, his face inches from hers, his voice breaking on the words. You don't get to die. Not after this. Not before I know your name. He turned and ran. He moved with supernatural speed, faster than any human could track, cradling her against his chest to shield her from the falling sparks and debris. He burst out of the burning barn just as the main structure collapsed inward. With a deafening roar, the entire building folding in on itself in a pillar of flame and ash. He reached the Aston Martin. Kieran scrambled into the back seat, immediately curling up at the woman's feet, refusing to be separated from her even now. Theron laid her gently across the leather seats, his hands hovering over her, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to fix this. Her lips were blue. Her chest wasn't moving. He grabbed his phone, dialed the emergency line to the Ashford estate with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Prepare the trauma unit. Theron ordered, his voice icy calm, the alpha mask snapping into place to cover the terror raging inside him. I'm bringing in a code red. Full medical response. Clear the bay. Is it the boy, Alpha? The voice on the other end asked, professional but concerned. Is Kieran? The boy is safe. Theron interrupted, his eyes never leaving the woman's pale face. He reached down, pressed 2 fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse he knew wasn't there. It's my mate, and she's been dead for 2 minutes. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Finally understood Alpha. We'll be ready. Theron ended the call and slammed the accelerator down. The Aston Martin's engine roared, and they rocketed down the dark highway toward the Ashford estate, toward the only place that might have the power to bring her back. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Kieran had shifted partially, one small human hand wrapped around the woman's lifeless fingers, tears streaming down his soot-stained face. Please, the boy whispered, his voice breaking. Please come back. You saved me. Please. Theron's hands tightened on the wheel. He had commanded armies. He had ended wars. He had bent 12 territories to his will through strength and strategy and sheer force of personality. But he couldn't command a heart to beat. The Ashford estate appeared through the trees, a fortress of glass and stone built into the side of the Iron Ridge Mountains. It was a seat of power, a symbol of strength, home to the Western Alliance headquarters. Tonight it was a hospital. The medical wing was already lit up like the sun when Theron screeched to a halt at the emergency entrance. Dr. Gideon Cross, the PAC's head physician, was waiting with 3 nurses and a gurney. He was 67 years old, had served 3 generations of Ashford Alphas, and had seen everything the violent world of PAC politics could throw at him. But when he saw the woman Theron carried, his face went pale. She's been dead for 4 minutes, Doctor. Gideon said, his professional assessment immediate and damning. Alpha, I need to be clear with you. Even if we restart her heart, the brain damage, save her, Theron roared, the sound making the glass walls of the medical wing vibrate, making the nurses flinch. The Alpha command was absolute, undeniable. I don't care what it takes. Save her. Dr. Gideon's jaw set. He'd been giving orders in this medical wing longer than Theron had been alive, but he also understood when to fight and when to obey. Understood, Alpha. Get her on the table, now. They moved as a unit, transferring the woman from Theron's arms to the gurney, wheeling her into the trauma room. Theron followed, his designer shirt ruined with soot and blood, his hands still shaking. Kieran, now fully in his human form, a small, pale 11-year-old boy with messy gray hair and amber eyes, sat in a chair in the corner, wrapped in a shock blanket, refusing to leave. The medical team moved with practiced efficiency. Chest compressions. Intubation. Defibrillator charged. Heart rate absent, a nurse called out. Blood pressure unreadable. Core temperature 92 degrees. She's hypothermic and in full cardiac arrest. Clear, Dr. Gideon shouted. The defibrillator pads discharged with a thump. The woman's body arched off the table. Nothing. The monitor remained flatlined, that terrible continuous tone filling the room. Again. Clear. Thump. Nothing. Dr. Gideon looked at Theron, and in that look was a terrible truth. She's been down too long, Alpha. I'm sorry. We've done everything. No, Theron said. His voice was quiet now, dangerous. Use the ambrosia. The room went dead silent. Even the machine seemed to pause. Alpha, a young nurse, said, her voice shaking. Ambrosia is for wolves, for PAC members. She's human. It will kill her. She's already dead, Theron said, stepping closer to the table. His eyes were bleeding gold now, the wolf so close to the surface that his canines had begun to elongate. Either the ambrosia brings her back or she stays dead. Those are the only options. Dr. Gideon, give me the ambrosia. That's an order. The doctor held Theron's gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, turned to a locked cabinet, and withdrew a vial of golden liquid that seemed to glow with its own light. Ambrosia. Concentrated alpha essence, a substance so potent that a single drop could heal injuries that would kill a normal wolf. It was sacred. It was rare. It was poison to humans. But she wasn't fully human anymore. Not since the mate bond had snapped into place. Theron could feel it, that invisible thread connecting them, could feel her on the other end of it, distant and fading, but still there. Dr. Gideon drew the ambrosia into a syringe, the golden liquid swirling inside the glass like liquid sunlight. He didn't hesitate. He plunged the needle directly into the woman's chest, into her silent heart, and pushed the plunger down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the woman's body arched off the table with a force that took 3 nurses to hold her down. Her mouth opened in a scream that had no breath behind it, a silent cry of agony. Her eyes flew open, and for one impossible second, they were completely silver, reflecting the overhead lights like mirrors. Then she collapsed back onto the table, motionless. The monitor flatlined again, that high-pitched tone screaming through the room. Theron felt the mate bond shudder, felt it stretch thin like a thread about to snap. His own heart stopped just for a second, in perfect synchronization with hers. Kieran slid off his chair. The small boy walked to the table on bare feet, ignoring the nurses who tried to stop him, and took the woman's lifeless hand in both of his. You're safe now, Kieran whispered, his voice small and broken. You saved me. You can come back now. You're safe. The monitor beeped. Once, then again. A slow, weak rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. Dr. Gideon let out a breath he'd been holding for what felt like an hour. She's back, he said, his voice shaking with something that might have been awe or terror or both. Stabilize her vitals. Get her into the regeneration tank immediately. Theron watched as they wheeled her away, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths, her heart beating a fragile rhythm that he could feel echoing in his own chest through the bond. He slumped against the wall, his legs suddenly feeling weak, and realized his hands were still shaking. A smooth voice cut through the silence. Alpha! Theron stiffened. He turned to see Silas Vane standing in the doorway. Silas was impeccable, as always, wearing a charcoal suit despite the late hour, not a hair out of place. He was Theron's second, his right hand, the wolf who managed the Alliance accounts in diplomatic relations, while Theron handled enforcement in military matters. He was also, Theron was beginning to suspect, a traitor. The fire, Silas said quietly, his pale blue eyes scanning the blood on the floor with distaste. Local authorities are calling it an accident. Faulty wiring in the storage room. The shelter owner is devastated, of course. But these old buildings, you know. Tragic. It wasn't an accident, Theron said, his voice low and dangerous. He pushed off the wall, standing to his full height. The doors were jammed. The explosion originated in the oxygen storage, but those tanks were new. I checked the inspection logs myself last month when I was searching for Kieran. Someone sabotaged them. Silas raised one perfectly groomed eyebrow. You think someone targeted the shelter specifically? I think someone knew Kieran was there, Theron said, stepping closer. He towered over Silas, and he saw the smaller man's pulse jump in his throat, and they tried to burn him alive. A tragedy averted, Silas said smoothly, gesturing vaguely down the hall toward the regeneration room. Thanks to that human. But Theron, we have a problem. Theron's eyes narrowed. What problem? You called her your mate in front of the medical staff. Word will spread within the hour. She is my mate, Theron said flatly. She's human. Silas stated, his tone hardening just a fraction. The Council will never accept a human, Luna. The Alliance barely tolerates your rule as it is, Theron. You're young, you're aggressive, you've made enemies. If they find out you've bonded with a human, a fragile creature with no standing, no lineage, they'll see it as weakness. Let them see what they want, Theron growled. Anyone who wants to challenge me knows where to find me. It's not just challenges you need to worry about, Silas said. He pulled out his phone, swiped through something, then turned the screen toward Theron. It was a text message sent from an unknown number. The human cannot be Luna. Fix this or we will. Theron's hand shot out, grabbing the phone. Who sent this? I don't know, Silas said. But it came from a Council prefix, someone on the inside. Theron crushed the phone in his fist, the screen shattering, plastic cracking. He let the pieces fall to the floor. Tell whoever sent that message that the human has a name, and when she wakes up, I'm going to learn it. Tell them that anyone who touches her answers to me personally. Silas bowed his head, but not before Theron saw a shadow pass over his face. Something cold, something calculating. As you wish, my king. But remember, fire destroys everything it touches, sometimes even the things we try to save. Silas turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the sterile hallway. Theron watched him go, a cold knot of suspicion tightening in his gut. He pulled out his own phone and sent a quick text to Cade, run a background check on everyone who had access to Kieran's location data. Everyone. I don't care if they're Pack or Council. I want names by morning. Then he walked down the hall to the regeneration room. Through the glass wall, he could see the woman floating in the healing liquid, her body suspended in the golden ambrosia solution. The burns on her back were already starting to knit together, pink skin replacing charred flesh. But something else was happening, something the ambrosia had never done before. Veins beneath her skin were glowing with a faint gold luminescence, branching out from her heart in intricate patterns like lightning frozen in flesh. She was changing. Theron placed his hand on the glass, his palm directly over where her heart would be. Who are you? He whispered. As if in answer, her eyes opened inside the liquid. They weren't brown anymore. They weren't human. They were violet. Deep electric violet, glowing with their own light. And in the reflection on the glass behind Theron, a shadow moved. Theron spun around, claws extending from his fingertips, a snarl ripping from his throat. The corridor was empty, nothing but sterile white walls and fluorescent lights. But the scent remained lingering in the air like a ghost. Wolfsbane. The poison used to kill wolves. And underneath it, something else. Something familiar. Peppermint. Theron's blood ran cold. Peppermint was the signature scent of the Northern Territories, of the Frostbite Pack. The killer was inside the house. And somewhere in the healing tank, suspended between death and transformation, the woman who had died saving his brother was becoming something the world had never seen before. Consciousness returned to his old Americ not as a flood, but as a slow, rhythmic tide. The first thing she noticed was the silence. It wasn't the empty silence of the shelter. At night, the kind broken by the occasional shuffle of paws or the creak of old wood settling. This was a heavy, insulated silence, like being underwater, like being buried alive in something soft and warm and utterly wrong. She took a breath. Liquid filled her lungs. Panic flared sharp and immediate, a jolt of pure animal terror that sent her heart rate spiking. She thrashed her limbs, hitting resistance on all sides. Glass. She was trapped in glass. Her eyes flew open and all she could see was gold, a glowing amber liquid that surrounded her completely, that filled her vision and her lungs and should have been drowning her, but somehow wasn't. The liquid tasted like honey and iron, sweet and metallic at the same time. She could breathe it. She was breathing it. Her lungs were pulling it in and pushing it out, and her body was accepting it as if this were normal, as if this were air. This is wrong, her mind screamed. This is impossible. Suddenly the liquid began to drain. She felt it swirling away with a mechanical hiss, felt the level dropping past her shoulders, her chest, her waist. The glass wall in front of her slid open with a pneumatic sigh, and Isolde tumbled out, coughing and gasping, trying to expel the liquid from her lungs. She hit the floor hard. The marble tiles cracked. Not broke, not scratched. Cracked. Spiderweb fractures spread out from where her knees made impact deep fissures in stone that should have required a sledgehammer to damage. Isolde froze, staring at the broken floor beneath her. Her knees didn't hurt. They should have hurt. She'd just fallen from a standing height onto marble, hard enough to fracture it, and she felt nothing. No pain, no impact, just the cold, smooth texture of the stone against her skin. "What did you do to me?" she whispered, her voice coming out strange. Harmonic. Deeper than it should have been, with a resonance that made the air vibrate. Easy, a voice rumbled, vibrating through the floorboards and straight into her bones. Isolde looked up through the wet strands of hair plastered to her face. Through the blur of gold-tinged liquid still clinging to her eyelashes, she saw him, the man from the fire. But he looked different now, solid and real in a way that the smoke and chaos had obscured. He was tall, easily 6'5", with shoulders broad enough to block out the harsh fluorescent lights of the medical bay. He wore a black shirt that strained against his chest, the fabric unable to fully contain the muscle beneath. His face was all sharp angles and hard lines, beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, dangerous, and magnetic in equal measure. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Gold. Pure molten gold with vertical slit pupils that contracted as they focused on her. Not human eyes, not even close. "Where is he?" Isolde rasped, trying to stand and failing, her legs shaking. "Where's the pup?" The words came out before conscious thought could stop them, driven by a need that overrode everything else. The pup. The wolf she'd died for. He had to be safe. That was all that mattered. "He's sleeping," the man said, his voice gentling slightly. "He refuses to leave the hallway outside this room. He hasn't spoken since we brought you in. He just sits there waiting for you to wake up." The man took a step closer, holding out a thick white towel. His movements were careful, controlled, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I am Theron Ashford." Isolde snatched the towel and scrambled backward until her spine hit the base of the tank she'd just emerged from. The cold glass pressed against her back, grounding her, giving her something solid to focus on. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice sharper now, finding strength in anger. "What did you do to me? Why can I hear the electricity in the walls? Why can I hear your heartbeat from 10 feet away? What the hell did you do?" It was true. She could hear everything. The hum of the building's electrical system, a constant vibration that ran through the walls like a living thing. The steady thump, thump, thump of Theron's heart, slower than a human's, more powerful. The drip of a faucet 3 rooms away. The whisper of air moving through ventilation shafts. The world had become a symphony of sound, overwhelming and impossible to filter. "You were dying," Isolde Theron said, kneeling to bring himself to her eye level. He didn't offer pity. He offered calm, solid, and unshakable as stone. "Your back was broken in 3 places. Your lungs were full of smoke and ash. Your heart had stopped. I made a choice. I gave you ambrosia." Ambrosia. Isolde repeated the word, foreign in her mouth. She wrapped the towel tighter around herself, suddenly aware that she was wearing nothing but a thin medical gown, that her body was exposed and vulnerable in a way that made her skin crawl. "What's ambrosia?" Theron's jaw tightened. "It's the concentrated essence of alpha blood. It's poison to humans. Every human who has ever been given ambrosia has died within minutes, their bodies unable to process something so fundamentally incompatible with human biology." He paused, his golden eyes scanning her face, lingering on details she couldn't see. "But you didn't die. You adapted." Isolde looked down at her arms. The burns were gone, completely erased, as if they'd never existed. But in their place were faint golden lines tracing the path of her veins beneath her skin. They pulsed softly in perfect time, with her heartbeat glowing with a light that seemed to come from inside her. "I'm glowing," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Oh God, I'm glowing." "You're alive," Theron corrected gently. "You were dead, Isolde. Clinically dead for 90 seconds. Your heart stopped. The ambrosia brought you back. But it changed you, changed me into what Isolde demanded. She tried to stand using the tank for support, and this time her legs held. The towel slipped slightly, and she grabbed it, wrapping it more securely. What am I now? Theron stood as well, keeping his distance, respecting the space she'd put between them. We don't know yet. You're the first human to survive the transformation. You're something new. I want to go home, Isolde whispered, though even as she said it, the memory crashed into her like a physical blow. The shelter, the fire, the explosion that had torn through her only refuge, the place she'd spent 3 years hiding, the closest thing to safe she'd had since she ran. I don't have a home anymore. You have a home here, Theron said, and something in his voice made it sound like a vow. You saved my brother. The pup you pulled from that cage is my blood, my family. You died protecting him. That means you're under my protection now. No one will touch you. No one will hurt you, I swear it. I saved a dog. Isolde snapped, her fear transmuting into defensive anger, the only shield she had left. Not a brother, a dog. Theron's expression softened just slightly. Come, he said, extending a hand. There's much you don't understand, and staying on the floor won't help you learn it. Isolde hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand. Every instinct she'd honed over 3 years of running screamed at her to refuse to keep distance between herself and this man who radiated power like a physical force. But her legs were still shaking, and the world was still spinning, and she needed answers more than she needed pride. She took his hand. The moment skin touched skin, a shockwave went through her. It wasn't static electricity, wasn't the normal friction of two people making contact. This was a jolt of pure, undiluted heat, a connection that seemed to bypass her nervous system entirely and plug directly into something deeper. She gasped, trying to pull back, but Theron's grip held firm. Not painful, not restricting, just steady. He pulled her to her feet effortlessly, as if she weighed nothing at all. And for a moment they stood chest to chest, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell something wild and clean that reminded her of winter forests and snow. What is this? She whispered, terrified of the answer. It's the bond, Theron murmured, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. But we'll discuss that later. First, you need to eat. The change burns calories faster than any furnace. If you don't feed your body soon, you'll start consuming your own muscle tissue. He released her hand and stepped back, and Isolde immediately felt the loss of that contact, the absence of that strange heat. It made her angry, that immediate need for something she didn't understand and hadn't asked for. Theron led her out of the medical wing. As they walked, Isolde caught her reflection in the dark glass of the corridor windows and stopped dead. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. Her mousy brown hair was gone, replaced by a cascade of raven black that fell past her shoulders, thick and glossy, in a way her natural hair had never been. But running through it, starting at her left temple and streaking back like a bolt of lightning, was a lock of pure silver white, stark and impossible. Her skin was porcelain pale, flawless, every blemish and scar from her previous life erased. But it was her eyes that made her breath catch. Violet, deep electric violet, glowing faintly in the dim light of the hallway. I look like a monster, Isolde breathed, reaching up to touch the glass to confirm that the reflection was real. You look like a queen, Theron said quietly, and the conviction in his voice made it impossible to dismiss as flattery. They reached a massive dining hall, and Isolde's stomach clenched at the sight of the table laden with food. Roasted meats, cheeses, fruits, bread still steaming from the oven. Her body responded before her mind could catch up, hunger roaring to life with a ferocity that shocked her. Sitting at the table, small and pale and impossibly young, was a boy. He looked up as they entered, and Isolde recognized those eyes. Amber. Ancient and intelligent, the same eyes that had watched her from cage number 7. Isolde, the boy said, and his voice broke on her name. He launched himself off the chair and ran to her, and Isolde caught him instinctively, swinging him up into her arms. She expected the impact to knock her over. Instead, she absorbed the force easily, her body automatically adjusting for his weight, finding her balance without conscious thought. The boy wrapped his arms around her neck and buried his face against her shoulder, and she could feel him trembling. You're a kid, Isolde said, the pieces clicking into place. The intelligent eyes, the way he'd understood her in the fire. You're not just a wolf, you're a person. I'm both, the boy said, pulling back to look at her. His face was streaked with tears, but he was smiling. I'm Kieran, I'm 11. And I'm a wolf, and you died for me. You actually died, your heart stopped. I felt it stop. He said it with the blunt honesty of a child without understanding the weight those words carried. I wouldn't let you burn, Isolde said softly, smoothing his messy gray hair back from his face. You were scared. I couldn't just leave you. A touching reunion, a cool voice said from the doorway, slicing through the warmth like a blade. Isolde turned, still holding Kieran, and saw a man standing in the entrance. He was tall, impeccably dressed, in a suit that probably cost more than Isolde had made in a year at the shelter. His pale blue eyes swept over her with the kind of clinical assessment usually reserved for livestock at auction. Silas Theron said, and his posture shifted instantly, becoming harder, more guarded. I didn't call for a council meeting. The council comes where it's needed, Alpha. Another voice said, and an older man stepped into view. He had a face like dried leather and eyes like flint, hard and unforgiving. This was Elder Voss Hargrave, though Isolde didn't know his name yet. Behind him came three more figures, all of them radiating the same kind of cold authority. Isolde felt Kieran tense in her arms. She set him down gently, positioning herself slightly in front of him, a protective stance that came from pure instinct. We received reports of unauthorized use of the Royal Ambrosia. Elder Voss set his gaze fixed on Isolde with open disgust. On a human, she's not just a human, Theron said, and Isolde heard the warning in his voice, the low rumble of a growl buried beneath the words. She's the savior of the air, and she's my mate. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Mate. Elder Voss scoffed, his lip curling. Impossible. The moon goddess doesn't pair alphas with stray humans. She's a biological anomaly, Theron, a science experiment gone wrong. Look at her. Violet eyes, gold veins. She's a mutation. She's under my protection. Theron repeated, his voice vibrating with lethal intent. He moved to stand beside Isolde, not in front of her, but next to her, a statement of partnership rather than possession. Protection is one thing, Silas interjected smoothly, stepping further into the room. His movements were calculated, precise. But status is another. You claim she's your mate, Theron. That makes her the Luna of the Ironwood Pack. A human Luna. He laughed softly, the sound devoid of humor. The pack will revolt. The Western Alliance will crumble. You know the law. A Luna must be strong. She must be able to bear the weight of leadership. She must prove herself worthy. I can bear it, Theron said. She must be audited. Elder Voss declared, and the room went deathly silent. Even Kieran went still, his small hand finding Isolde's and gripping it tight. No, Theron snarled, the sound more animal than human. She just woke up. She's recovering. She barely understands what's happened to her. If she's truly your mate, Elder Voss said, his eyes narrowing. If the Ambrosia has truly elevated her, then she should survive the audit. Standard protocol for any Luna candidate without established bloodlines. The trial by hunt has been pack law for 200 years. And if she fails, Isolde asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. She didn't know where the courage came from. Maybe it was the new strength in her blood, or maybe it was the way these men looked at her like she was something to be disposed of, and she'd spent 3 years being invisible, being dismissed, and she was done with it. If you fail, Silas said, and there was something almost like pity in his voice, almost, but not quite, then your memory is wiped. You're exiled from Packlands, and we cease the investigation into your background, Miss Merrick. Isolde went cold. They knew. They knew she'd changed her name. They knew she was hiding. We know you were hiding in Oak Hollow. Silas continued, watching her face for reaction. We know you changed your name 3 years ago. We know you're running from something. The audit offers you a chance to prove your worth and earn our protection. Or you can refuse and we dig into your past. Your choice. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Accept the trial and possibly die, or refuse and have her past exposed, dragged into the light for everyone to see. Isolde looked at Kieran, at this 11-year-old boy who had been trapped in a cage, who had been kidnapped and tortured and left to burn. She thought about the way he'd refused to leave her in the fire, the way he'd grabbed her sleeve with his teeth and tried to pull her to safety even though he was injured and terrified. No one had fought for her in 3 years, but this child had tried. I accept, Isolde said clearly. Isolde Theron gripped her arm, his eyes searching hers with something that looked like fear. The audit isn't a written test. It's a trial of survival. They will hunt you, 12 trained wolves, 15 minutes, and if I interfere, I forfeit my crown. Do you understand what you're agreeing to? Isolde felt something strange happening in her mouth. A tingling, aching pressure in her gums like her teeth were shifting. She ran her tongue along them and felt something sharp. Longer. Wrong. Let them try, she said, looking directly at Elder Voss. She could smell him now. Really smell him. Fear. Beneath the expensive cologne and the righteous indignation, he was afraid of her. They all were. That's why they wanted her gone. Very well, Elder Voss said, his face hardening. The audit will begin in 2 days' time at the Winter Solstice Gala. Until then, she remains a guest under probationary status. The council members turned and left, their footsteps echoing in the massive hall. Silas lingered for just a moment, his gaze sliding over Isolde with an expression she couldn't quite read. Good luck, Miss Merrick, he said softly. You'll need it. When they were gone, Theron slammed his fist onto the heavy oak dining table. The wood didn't just crack. It splintered, a jagged break running down the center like a lightning strike. Why did you agree, he demanded, turning to her, and for the first time she saw the mask slip, saw genuine fear beneath the alpha authority. They want to kill you. This is an execution dressed up as tradition. They were going to kill me anyway, Isolde said quietly. She sat down, her legs suddenly feeling weak, adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Or worse, they were going to dig into my past, expose me, use whatever they found as leverage. She looked up at Theron, at Kieran, who had climbed into the chair beside her and was watching her with those two old eyes. Before the fire, I saw something at the shelter, Isolde said. During my perimeter check, there was a car parked down the access road, a sedan, gray. I saw a man walking toward the back of the barn, toward the storage room where the oxygen tanks were kept. Theron went very still. Did you see his face? No, it was too dark, but I smelled him. Isolde closed her eyes, focusing on the memory. Her new senses made everything sharper, clearer, like her brain was finally able to access files that had always been there but locked away. He smelled like sulfur and expensive tobacco, and something sweet, like peppermint. Theron's face went pale. The anger drained out of him, replaced by something colder. Harder, peppermint, he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of something terrible. What is it, Isolde asked. Peppermint is the signature scent of the North, Theron said slowly. The Frostbite Pack. They control the northern territories, the trade routes through the mountains. Their alpha is coming to the gala. Kieran finished, his small voice cutting through the tension. Alpha Draven Kale. He's supposed to be Dad's ally. Theron crouched down in front of Isolde, taking her face in his hands. His palms were warm, callous, gentle, despite the strength she knew they contained. If Draven was at the barn, then the person who tried to kill Kieran is coming to dinner, and he'll be watching you during the audit. Then I'll survive it, Isolde said, meeting his golden gaze without flinching. And then we figure out who else is involved, because one alpha doesn't orchestrate something this big alone. Theron searched her face for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Respect maybe, or recognition. We have 2 days, he said. I need to know what you can do. What the ambrosia gave you. He stood, extending his hand again. Come with me. The private training dojo was in the basement of the Ashford estate, a massive space with reinforced walls and floors designed to withstand the kind of damage that supernatural strength could inflict. Theron had dismissed everyone, keeping only Kieran as a witness. I need to test your limits, Theron said, standing in the center of the padded floor. He changed into training clothes, simple black pants, and a fitted shirt that showed every line of muscle. Don't hold back. I can take it. Isolde stood opposite him, wearing borrowed workout gear that fit her transformed body better than anything she'd owned in her previous life. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. Then we learn together, Theron said. He moved without warning, a punch thrown at half speed, telegraphed enough that any trained fighter would see it coming. Isolde's body reacted before her conscious mind could engage. She didn't dodge. She caught his fist in her palm, her fingers wrapping around his knuckles, stopping the blow completely. Theron's eyes widened. Again, he said, they spent the next hour testing. Speed tests showed she could run 40 miles per hour, faster than any human, but slower than a wolf in full sprint. But she was durable in a way that defied explanation. When Theron increased the force of his strikes, testing her pain tolerance, she took a punch to the ribs that would have shattered a human's chest cavity. She grunted, stumbled back 2 steps, but stayed on her feet. Your reflexes. Theron noted, breathing hard, sweat glistening on his chest. You're anticipating my moves before I make them. I can hear your muscles tensing, Isolde said, panting. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, could feel the golden veins beneath her skin pulsing brighter. I hear the air shift when you move. It's like, I know what you're going to do half a second before you do it. Good, Theron said. You'll need that. They moved to strength testing. Baseline lift 200 pounds easy, 400 pounds with effort. By the end of the session, Isolde was deadlifting 700 pounds, her body shaking with exertion but holding. That's impossible, she gasped, staring at the barbell. Normal humans max out around 400, even trained athletes. You're not normal anymore, Theron said. He pulled out a notebook, writing down numbers. The ambrosia rewrote your genetics. You're something between human and wolf, a hybrid. The word hung in the air. Hybrid, Isolde repeated. She sat down hard on the mat, her body suddenly feeling foreign wrong. What does that make me? Theron sat beside her, not touching, but close. Powerful, he said simply. Different. Dangerous to people who want the world to stay the same. Kieran, who had been watching from the corner with wide eyes, walked over and climbed into Isolde's lap without asking permission. She's not dangerous, he said firmly. She's safe. She saved me. Out of the mouths of children, Theron murmured, and something in his expression softened. They sat in silence for a moment, the three of them, and Isolde felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not quite belonging, but close. The first hint of it in 3 years. The next morning, Isolde woke to find Theron had assigned her a private suite. The room was 3 times the size of the entire trailer she'd lived in at Oak Hollow. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Iron Ridge Mountains, snow-capped peaks glowing pink in the dawn light. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Isolde called, expecting Theron or maybe Kieran. The door opened to reveal a woman. Tall, blonde, stunning in a way that made Isolde immediately aware of her tangled hair and borrowed pajamas. The woman wore expensive clothes cut to emphasize every curve, and she moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much space she commanded. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice honey-sweet. "I'm Celeste Winters. The Alpha asked me to help prepare you for the gala." "How kind," Isolde said, not bothering to hide her skepticism. Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm just doing my duty. Can't have you embarrassing the pack, can we?" Over the next 6 hours, Celeste put Isolde through what could only be described as psychological warfare disguised as beauty preparation. Every compliment came with a barb. Every touch felt calculated. "So this is the stray," Celeste said, as she worked on Isolde's hair, her fingers pulling just a little too hard. "Theron has a habit of picking up broken things. I suppose he thinks he can fix you." "I'm not broken," Isolde said, meeting Celeste's gaze in the mirror. Celeste laughed harsh and sharp. "Honey, you're human. You're glass in a world of hammers. Do you know why Theron hasn't marked you yet? Why he hasn't bitten your neck to seal the bond?" Isolde didn't answer. She'd wondered but hadn't asked. "Because he knows you'll die," Celeste whispered, leaning close. "A human body can't handle the mating bite. You'll bleed out. He's stringing you along until he gets bored or until you break, whichever comes first." The words hit like physical blows, finding all the insecurities Isolde had spent 3 years trying to bury. But then she remembered something. The way Theron had looked at her in the training room. The way he'd asked permission before every touch. The way he'd slept outside her door last night. She'd heard him settle against the wall at 2 a.m. guarding her. "Just do my hair," Celeste, Isolde said coldly. Celeste smirked, but Isolde caught something else in her expression. A flicker of uncertainty. As if she'd expected Isolde to break and was surprised when she didn't. That evening, Theron taught Isolde to dance. The ballroom was empty except for them soft music playing from hidden speakers. He moved with fluid grace, guiding her through the steps of a waltz. "For the gala," he explained, "you'll be expected to dance." His hand rested on her waist, warmed through the thin fabric of her practice dress. Their bodies moved in perfect synchronization, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. Theron, Isolde said quietly, "Why haven't you marked me?" His steps faltered just for a second. Then he pulled her closer, his voice dropping low. "Because I'm terrified it will kill you. Human bodies can't handle the mating bite. Your body has accepted the ambrosia, but the bite is different. More invasive. More permanent. But I'm not human anymore," Isolde countered. "You're not Wolf either," Theron said. His forehead touched hers, and for a moment they just breathed together. "You're something new, unknown, and I refuse to risk your life for tradition." The music swelled. They turned, and Isolde felt the bond between them pulse brighter, that golden thread now visible when she closed her eyes. "What if I'm willing to take that risk?" she whispered. Theron pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. His were molten gold, burning with intensity. "Then we make that choice together. When you're ready, not before." The moment stretched heavy with possibility. Then Kieran burst through the doors, breaking the tension. "Dad, the moon is full tonight. I felt it." Theron's face went pale. "Isolde, you need to leave, now." "What's wrong?" Isolde asked. "It's the blood rage," Kieran said, his voice small. "The curse. Dad can't control it during the full moon." Theron was already backing away, his hands trembling. "Get her out," he ordered Kieran. "Lock the door. Don't let me hurt her." But Isolde saw his eyes. They were bleeding from gold to black, his pupils dilating until the color was completely swallowed. His muscles tensed, claws extending from his fingertips. "I'm not leaving," Isolde said firmly. Theron snarled, a sound of pure animal rage. The human part of him was losing, drowning in the wolf. Then something happened that shocked everyone. Isolde stepped forward and spoke a single word, her voice amplified by something primal and commanding. "Sleep." The ashen command. Theron collapsed mid-shift, his body going limp. Isolde caught him staggering under his weight but holding firm. He was unconscious, breathing deeply, the curse broken by the sound of her voice. Kieran stared at her with wide eyes. "Only alphas can command," he breathed. "What are you?" Isolde looked at Theron's peaceful face in her arms, then at the child watching her with awe. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I think we're about to find out." The ballroom of the Ashford estate was a cathedral of crystal and gold. Chandeliers dripped from the vaulted ceiling like frozen waterfalls, each one casting prismatic light across the polished marble floors. The space was designed to hold 200 guests comfortably. Tonight, it held 412 packed shoulder to shoulder, all of them waiting to see the human who had dared to claim the title of Luna. Isolde stood in the preparation room just off the main hall, her hands gripping the edge of a mahogany table, hard enough that her knuckles went white. Through the heavy oak doors, she could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the underlying current of anticipation that felt more like bloodlust than celebration. This was the Winter Solstice Gala, the most important gathering of the Western Alliance, where deals were made and broken, where power was consolidated and challenged, where the fate of 12 territories was negotiated over champagne and thinly veiled threats. And tonight, it was also the stage for her execution. "You don't have to do this," Theron said quietly. He stood beside her, resplendent in formal dress, but his eyes were dark with something that looked like grief. "We can leave. Right now. I'll take you and Kieran and we'll disappear. Let them have the crown. Let them have everything. I don't care." Isolde turned to look at him, this alpha king who was offering to give up an empire for a woman he'd known for 2 days. The bond between them pulsed brighter, that golden thread now visible when she closed her eyes. "They'll hunt us anyway," she said softly. "You know they will. And Kieran deserves better than a life on the run." She thought about the past 48 hours, the training sessions that had pushed her hybrid body to its limits, the political lessons from Dr. Gideon, learning the intricate web of alliances and enmities that made up the Western territories. The quiet moments with Kieran, reading him stories before bed, this child who called her brave, even though she felt anything but. And the time with Theron. The careful distance he maintained, always asking permission before touching, always giving her space to breathe, even as the mate bond pulled them together like gravity. Last night in the war room, they'd planned her survival strategy. Theron had spread maps of the ballroom across the table, marking exits and obstacles, teaching her how to use the environment to her advantage. The door opened and Silas Vane appeared. He looked immaculate as always, his pale blue eyes scanning Isolde with the same clinical detachment she'd come to expect. "It's time," he said simply. Isolde drew a deep breath and nodded. Theron offered his arm and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric. Together, they walked toward the ballroom doors. Kieran appeared from nowhere, his small hand slipping into Isolde's free one. "I'm coming with you," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "All the way to the entrance, so everyone sees that I'm on your side." The doors swung open and a herald's voice rang out across the sudden silence. "Alpha Theron, Ashford's sovereign of the Western Territories." And his guest, Isolde Merrick. The music stopped, every head turned. 412 pairs of eyes locked onto Isolde as she stepped into the ballroom. The silence was suffocating. Then the whispers started, a hissing tide of sound that washed over her from all directions. "That's the human. Look at her eyes. Unnatural. She died and came back. It's an abomination. My cousin said she glows in the dark, like some kind of witch. She won't last 5 minutes in the hunt." Isolde kept her chin up and her eyes forward, focusing on the far end of the ballroom where the head table waited. Theron's grip on her arm tightened fractionally, a silent message of support. Kieran's hand in hers was steady, trusting absolute in its faith. They walked down the center aisle and Isolde felt the weight of every stare, every judgment, every dismissal. She'd spent 3 years being invisible, and now she was the only thing anyone could see. At the head table sat the Granite Syndicate, though she didn't know their collective name yet. Elder Voss Hargrave, his weathered face set in lines of disapproval. Silas Vane, who had somehow arrived ahead of them, his expression unreadable. Alpha Marek Stahl, a mountain of a man with scars crossing his knuckles and murder in his eyes. And 2 people Isolde recognized with a jolt that stopped her heart: Dr. Lucian Donovan, her father, who was supposed to be dead, and Counselor Maris Donovan, her mother, who had sold her to experiments when she was 14 years old. The world tilted. Isolde's steps faltered, and only Theron's steadying hand kept her upright. "No," she breathed. "No, that's impossible." Lucian looked exactly as she remembered him from 10 years ago. Silver-streaked, dark hair, sharp features, cold gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was studying her the way a scientist studies a specimen, with detached interest and not an ounce of paternal warmth. Maris was elegant and cruel in equal measure. Her auburn hair swept into an immaculate chignon, her green eyes, Isolde's eyes before the transformation, assessing her daughter with the same emotion she might give to a stock portfolio. Calculating returns. "You know them," Theron said quietly, feeling the tension radiating from her body. "They're my parents," Isolde whispered. "My dead parents." Theron's entire body went rigid. "What?" But there was no time to explain, because they'd reached the head table and Elder Voss was standing to make his address. Welcome, honored guests, to the winter solstice gala. Voss said, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced authority. Tonight we gather to celebrate the longest night of the year, to honor the bonds that unite our territories, and to witness a trial that will determine the future of the Western Alliance. He gestured to Isolde with a sweep of his hand that managed to be both grand and dismissive. Before you stands Isolde Merrick, a human who claims the right to be Luna, who has been transformed by forbidden ambrosia into something unprecedented, who has, through circumstances both tragic and suspicious, attached herself to our Alpha King. Theron growled low and dangerous, but Voss continued. Pack law is clear. Any who would claim the title of Luna must prove themselves worthy. Tonight, Miss Merrick will face the audit. A trial by hunt. 15 minutes. 12 of our finest enforcers. She must survive without lethal force, without shifting, and without the interference of her claimed mate. Voss's eyes glittered with malice. If Alpha Theron interferes in any way, he forfeits his crown and his territories to council governance. The rules are absolute. He turned to face Isolde directly. Do you accept these terms? Isolde felt hundreds of eyes on her, felt the weight of expectation and the hunger for her failure. She thought about running, about refusing, about grabbing Kieran and Theron and disappearing into the night. But then she smelled it, faint beneath the perfume and cologne and expensive wine. Peppermint. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on a man she hadn't noticed before. Tall, broad-shouldered, with white blonde hair and a scar running down his left cheek. He was watching her with the focused intensity of a predator, and when their eyes met, he smiled. Alpha Draven Kao, the man who had set the fire, the man who had tried to murder Kieran. And he was here surrounded by allies, confident that he would watch her die tonight. Isolde's hands curled into fists. The golden veins beneath her skin pulsed brighter, responding to her anger, to her determination. I accept, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. But I have conditions. The crowd murmured. Voss's eyebrows rose. You are in no position to negotiate, Miss Merrick. I died for the heir of this pack, Isolde said, stepping forward away from Theron's protective proximity. I gave my last breath to save a child I didn't know was royalty. I didn't do it for power or status or any of the things you people value. She let her gaze sweep across the assembled wolves, meeting eyes that flinched away from her amethyst stare. So here are my conditions. When I survive this hunt, you stop the investigation into my past. You acknowledge my claim to stand beside Theron as an equal, not as a possession. And you answer my questions about who orchestrated the fire that nearly killed Kieran. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Voices shouted over each other, some outraged, some intrigued, all of them loud. Elder Voss raised his hand for silence. When you survive, he said, emphasizing the when with sarcastic precision. Very well. We agree to your terms, assuming you live long enough to collect. He gestured to the center of the ballroom where servants were rapidly clearing furniture to create an open space. The hunt begins in 10 minutes. Use the time wisely. Theron pulled Isolde aside into a small alcove away from the crowd. His hands cupped her face, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with a gentleness that contradicted the violence in his eyes. Those are your parents, he said, and it wasn't a question. Isolde nodded, not trusting her voice. Then they've been planning this since you were a child, Theron said quietly. The experiments, the ambrosia compatibility. They prepared you for this. Or they prepared me to be a weapon, Isolde countered, and I refused to be what they made me. Theron leaned his forehead against hers, and for a moment they just breathed together, finding stillness in the chaos. Promise me something, he said. Anything. Promise me you'll survive. Because if you die in there, I will tear this entire estate apart. Crown be damned. Isolde pulled back enough to meet his eyes. I promise, she said. Then she smiled, sharp and feral. Besides, I already died once this week. I'm not eager to make it a habit. A gong sounded deep and resonant. The 10 minutes were up. Isolde walked back into the ballroom. The furniture had been cleared, creating a circular arena roughly 60 feet in diameter. The crowd had pressed back against the walls, forming a living barrier, their eyes glowing in the dim light as their wolves rose close to the surface, eager for violence. In the center of the circle stood 12 wolves, not in their animal forms, but in their human ones, dressed in training gear, their bodies honed weapons. Isolde recognized some of them from the estate. Enforcers, warriors, killers. Elder Voss stood at the edge of the circle holding an antique stopwatch. The rules are simple, he announced. 15 minutes. Miss Merrick must survive. The enforcers may use any non-lethal means to subdue her. If she falls unconscious or yields, the trial ends in failure. If Alpha Theron or any ally interferes, he forfeits his crown. He looked at Isolde. Any questions? Just one, Isolde said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. When I win, do I get to ask who paid you to set up this farce? Voss's face darkened. We'll see how confident you are in 14 minutes. He raised the stopwatch. Begin, he said, and clicked the timer. The first four enforcers moved as a unit, attacking from different angles with the coordination of wolves who had trained together for years. Isolde's enhanced senses screamed warnings, tracking their movements, calculating trajectories. The lead enforcer came from her left, a hooking punch aimed at her temple. Isolde's body moved before her conscious mind engaged muscle memory from 48 hours of training taking over. She ducked under the punch, felt the wind of it pass over her head, and came up inside his guard. Her palm strike caught him in the solar plexus with more force than she'd intended. The enforcer flew backwards 6 feet and crashed into the crowd, who caught him and shoved him back into the circle. The crowd gasped. First blood, someone shouted, though no actual blood had been spilled. The next three came faster, harder. A kick aimed at her knees, a grapple attempt from behind, a straight jab toward her face. Isolde twisted, feeling her hybrid body respond with speed and flexibility that shouldn't have been possible. She caught the kicking leg, used it as a lever to flip its owner over her shoulder. Slammed her elbow back into the grappler's ribs, heard something crack. Dodged the jab and countered with a kick to the attacker's midsection that sent him staggering. 5 seconds had passed. The enforcers regrouped, circling her now with more caution. They'd underestimated her. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The next attack came from above. One of them had climbed onto the shoulders of another and launched himself at her, aerial assault claws extended. Not shifted, but elongated nails sharp as knives. Isolde couldn't dodge in time. She threw her hands up instinctively, and something happened that shocked everyone in the room. Her voice erupted from her throat, amplified by something primal and commanding. Stop. The airborne enforcer froze mid-descent, his body locking up as if he'd hit an invisible wall. He dropped straight down, crashing to the floor in a heap, unable to move, his eyes wide with shock. It was the Ashen Command, the same power that had stopped Theron during his blood rage. A power that should have been impossible for anyone who wasn't an alpha. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Voices shouted accusations and denials. Wolves snarled and backed away, the crowd pressing harder against the walls, as if the center of the room had become poisonous. Elder Voss stared at Isolde with naked fear. What are you? He breathed. But there was no time for answers, because the remaining enforcers attacked with desperate fury. If she could command them, they had to finish this fast before she figured out how to weaponize that power. They came in a wave, 8 wolves all at once, abandoning strategy for overwhelming force. Isolde felt the world slow down around her, her senses expanding to encompass everything. She could hear each individual heartbeat, could smell the adrenaline and fear, could see the exact moment each muscle tensed before movement. She moved like water, like fire, like something that couldn't be pinned down or contained. She ducked and weaved and struck with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters and pressure points that her veterinary training had taught her, places that would disable without permanent damage. One enforcer grabbed her from behind in a bear hug, pinning her arms. 2 more rushed in to capitalize on the restraint. Isolde threw her head back, slamming it into her captor's nose with a crunch that made the crowd wince. As his grip loosened, she dropped her weight, slipping down and out of his grasp, sweeping his legs out from under him. She came up, spinning her fist, connecting with the palm of the first rushing enforcer, her foot catching the second in the chest. 10 minutes had passed. Isolde was breathing hard now, her body burning through energy at a frightening rate. Her eyes blazed with amethyst light, pulsing in time with her racing heart. The enforcers regrouped one final time. Only 4 were still standing. The others were scattered around the circle's edge, groaning, nursing injuries, unable to continue. And then Alpha Draven Kale stepped into the circle. He wasn't one of the designated enforcers. He hadn't been announced as part of the trial. But he walked into the center of the arena with the confidence of someone who knew the rules didn't apply to him, and from his jacket he pulled a silver-plated pistol. The crowd went silent. This isn't a duel, Theron roared from the edge of the circle, his voice vibrating with barely controlled rage. Weapons are forbidden. The rules, she's not bound by our rules, Draven said calmly, his peppermint scent washing over Isolde in a wave. She's a monster wearing a human face. And monsters get put down. He aimed the gun directly at Isolde's chest. Theron moved, his body already shifting, preparing to tear through the guards holding him back. Crown be damned. But Isolde's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Sleep, she said, and the Ashen Command rolled out from her like a physical wave. Theron collapsed mid-shift, his body going limp before he could forfeit his crown. The guards caught him, lowering him gently to the floor, their eyes wide with shock. Draven smiled. Clever girl. Saving his throne even now. He cocked the pistol. But you can't command me. I'm not Pack. He fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet flew true, aimed at Isolde's heart fast enough that no human eye could track it. Isolde raised her hand. She didn't think about it, didn't plan, it didn't even understand what she was doing. She just knew with absolute certainty that she could stop it. The golden veins in her arm blazed like lightning. Power surged through her, something primal and elemental that had nothing to do with Wolf and everything to do with the transformation that had rewritten her on a cellular level. A wave of pure kinetic force erupted from her palm. The bullet hit the invisible barrier 3 inches from her hand and stopped. Just stopped. Hung in the air for a single frozen heartbeat, the metal deformed from the impact before it dropped to the marble floor with a metallic clink that echoed in the absolute silence. 412 wolves stared at Isolde Merrick, this human who had died and come back as something impossible, and for the first time in pack history, they felt fear of prey. Draven's smile faltered. He stared at the fallen bullet, at his useless gun, at Isolde, whose eyes lit the ballroom with violet fire. "What are you?" he whispered, echoing Voss's earlier question. Isolde took a step toward him, and Draven actually stepped back. "I'm the woman who survived your fire," she said quietly. "I'm the woman who died saving a child you tried to murder. I'm the woman who came back from death to stand here and expose you for the coward you are." Draven's face twisted. "You can't prove anything," he snarled. But before Isolde could respond, Draven convulsed. His hands flew to his throat, clawing at his collar. Foam appeared at the corners of his mouth, and his eyes went wide with shock and agony. He collapsed, thrashing his body, seizing violently. "Someone poisoned him," a voice screamed from the crowd. Dr. Gideon rushed forward, but even from across the room, Isolde could smell it. Cyanide, fast-acting, lethal. Draven's thrashing slowed, then stopped. His eyes went glassy, staring at nothing. He was dead. And Silas Vane's voice cut through the shocked silence, smooth as silk and sharp as a blade. "She killed him. The witch killed our alpha with dark magic. She deflected the bullet and then struck him down with sorcery." The crowd erupted. Accusations flew from every direction. Witch, murderer, abomination, monster. Isolde stood in the center of the chaos, her hands still glowing faintly, Draven's corpse at her feet, and for the first time since waking in the healing tank, she felt truly afraid. Because Silas was smiling. And her mother, Counselor Maris, was standing now, her face arranged in perfect shock and horror, but her eyes calculating, already working through the implications. This had been a trap. Not just the hunt, all of it. The fire, the audit, the poisoning. Someone had orchestrated every piece to lead to this exact moment, with Isolde standing over a dead alpha accused of murder, with 400 witnesses and no way to prove her innocence. The ballroom doors burst open. Armed wolves poured in wearing the silver insignia of Alliance Guard. Behind them walked a woman in her 70s, her silver hair swept back from a face like carved granite, wearing the formal robes of the High Court. By order of the Western Alliance High Court, the woman announced, her voice brooking no argument. "This trial is suspended pending investigation into the death of Alpha Draven Kale. All parties involved are to be detained." She looked at Isolde with eyes that gave away nothing. "Miss Merrick, you will come with us. Now." Theron was stirring the Ashen Command wearing off. His eyes snapped open, immediately seeking Isolde. "No," he growled, trying to stand. "You can't take her." The woman, Justice Alara Stone, though Isolde didn't know that yet, turned her gaze to Theron. "Alpha Ashford, stand down, or I will have you removed from these proceedings permanently." Isolde met Theron's eyes across the ballroom. She tried to convey everything she couldn't say. "Trust me, I'll survive this. Don't throw away your crown for me." Then she turned to Justice Stone and said with a calm she didn't feel, "I'll come peacefully. I have nothing to hide." Justice Stone's lips twitched in what might have been approval. "Then you won't mind answering questions." "Take her." The guards moved forward, and Isolde let them place restraints on her wrists. Not iron, but silver burning against her skin, even through the protective cloth they'd wrapped around the cuffs. As they led her toward the doors, she passed her mother. Maris's expression was perfectly crafted sympathy, but she leaned close enough to whisper, "You always were a disappointment, Isolde. But at least now, you're a useful one." Isolde's blood ran cold. Before she could respond, she was pulled past out of the ballroom, away from Theron's anguished roar, away from Kieran's crying, away from the only safety she'd found in 3 years. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off the chaos. But from a balcony overlooking the ballroom, a woman with auburn hair streaked with gray watched the scene unfold. Sage Merrick pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Her little sister. Alive, after all these years. She'd thought Isolde had died in the experiments at age 14. She'd searched for 3 years before giving up hope. And now here she was, transformed into something impossible, being dragged away in silver chains. Sage pulled out her phone and dialed Justice Stone's private line. "Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking, "I have evidence about the Granite Syndicate, about Dr. Donovan and Counselor Maris, about what they did to that girl." Justice Stone's voice was crisp. Meet me in my chambers. 1 hour, and bring everything you have. Sage ended the call and looked back at the ballroom where Theron was being restrained by 6 guards roaring his mate's name. Hold on, little sister, Sage whispered. Justice is coming. The holding cell smelled of silver and wolfsbane, a combination designed to weaken any supernatural creature unlucky enough to be locked inside. Isolde sat on the narrow bench, her wrists still bound in silver cuffs, watching the burns heal and reappear in an endless cycle as her hybrid body fought the poison. She'd been here for 2 hours. No one had come to question her. No one had explained what happened next. The door opened. But it wasn't Justice Stone or Alliance Guard. It was 3 men in tactical gear, faces covered moving with military precision. Before Isolde could scream, one of them jabbed a syringe into her neck. The world tilted, went gray, then black. She woke in a white room. Not the sterile white of the medical wing, but the industrial white of a laboratory. Bright lights, stainless steel tables, the smell of chemicals and fear. Hello, daughter. Isolde's head snapped up. Dr. Lucian Donovan stood at the foot of the examination table where she was strapped down. Her father, the man who was supposed to be dead. You, Isolde rasped. Her throat was dry, her voice hoarse. You orchestrated all of this. Of course, Lucian said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He picked up a tablet, scrolling through data. The fire was to test your viability. We needed to know if you would instinctively protect others, even at cost to yourself. You passed beautifully. You killed people, Isolde spat. You tried to murder a child. Science requires sacrifice, Lucian said with the same tone someone might use to discuss the weather. And young Kieran served his purpose. He drew you out. He triggered the Alpha King's protective instincts. He created the perfect conditions for your transformation. A door opened, and Counselor Maris entered, Isolde's mother. She wore a white lab coat over her elegant dress, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun. Is she ready for extraction? Maris asked, not even looking at Isolde's face. Almost, Lucian replied. Her ambrosia integration is at 94%. Bone marrow extraction should yield enough genetic material to create at least 50 viable hybrids. 50, Isolde whispered. You want to make more of me. Not you, Varys said, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. The emotion there was clinical interest, nothing more. Better than you, stronger, more obedient. You were the prototype, they'll be the army. Another door and Silas Vane entered. He'd abandoned his expensive suit for tactical gear, an assault rifle slung over his shoulder. Perimeter is secure, Silas reported. But we have a problem. Ashford is coming, he's tracking the mate bond, and he's bringing his entire pack. How long, Lucian asked. 20 minutes, maybe less. Then we extract now, Lucian said. He picked up a surgical drill, the kind used for bone marrow biopsies. Without anesthesia, her healing factor will counteract any drugs we give her anyway. He powered on the drill. It whined to life, a high-pitched scream that made Isolde's teeth ache. This will hurt, he said, not unkindly. But you've always been resilient. That's why I chose you. The drill lowered toward Isolde's sternum, and then the building shook. Not an earthquake. An impact. Something massive hitting the outer wall with enough force to crack reinforced concrete. He's here, Silas said, his face going pale. Impossible, Maris snapped. The facility is shielded. He can't track her through. The wall exploded inward. Not collapsed. Exploded. A section of concrete and steel the size of a car blasted into the lab, tumbling end over end before crashing into the far wall. Through the hole stepped Theron Ashford, but not in his human form. This was the hybrid form, the war shape that Alphas took when mercy was no longer an option. 7.5 feet tall muscles like corded steel claws that could tear through steel fangs that could crush bone. His eyes burned gold, fixed on Isolde with absolute focus. Behind him came the Ironwood pack. 30 wolves in various states of shift, led by Cade Brennan. They poured through the breach like a flood of fur and fangs in righteous fury. Lucian stumbled backward, dropping the drill. Silas raised his rifle. Don't! Isolde screamed. If you shoot, you forfeit everything. Silas hesitated. In that moment of indecision, Theron moved. He was across the room in 3 strides faster than human eyes could track. His clawed hand closed around Silas's throat, lifting the smaller man off the ground. You tried to take my mate, Theron growled, his voice barely human. You poisoned Draven to frame her. You've been selling information to the Frostbite Pack for months. He hurled Silas across the room. The traitor hit a steel cabinet hard enough to dent it, then slumped to the floor unconscious. Theron turned to Lucian and Maris. They had backed against the far wall, trapped. But before he could advance, Isolde spoke. Theron, don't. He froze, his hybrid form trembling with barely restrained violence. Why? Because I need them alive, Isolde said. For the trial. For justice. Not revenge. Theron's claws flexed, gouging furrows in the concrete floor. They tortured you. They tried to harvest you like livestock. I know, Isolde said. Her voice was steady despite the fear and anger churning in her gut. But if we kill them, we're no better than they are. And I refuse to let them turn me into the weapon they wanted. Theron held her gaze for a long moment. Then slowly the hybrid form receded. His bones shifted, muscles compressed, claws retracted. Within seconds he was human again, though his eyes still burned gold. He walked to Isolde, tore the restraints off the examination table with his bare hands, and pulled her into his arms. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe." "We're safe," Isolde corrected, her arms wrapping around him. "Together." A small voice came from the doorway. "Dad?" Isolde Kieran stood there, still in his wolf pup form, his amber eyes wide. Behind him stood someone Isolde had never seen before. A woman in her late 20s with auburn hair and green eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like Isolde's had before the transformation. "Isolde," the woman said, her voice breaking. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, you're alive." "Who are you?" Isolde asked, though something deep in her chest already knew the answer. "I'm Sage," the woman said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm your sister." 3 days later, the grand hall of the Ashford estate had been transformed into a courtroom. 500 witnesses packed the gallery. Cameras broadcast the proceedings to all 12 territories of the Western Alliance. At the bench sat Justice Alara Stone and 4 other High Court justices. In the defendant's box sat the Granite Syndicate Elder Voss Hargrave, Alpha Marek Stahl, Silas Vane bandaged and chained, Dr. Lucian Donovan, and Counselor Maris Donovan. Alpha Draven Kale's seat was empty, marked with black cloth to indicate his posthumous trial. Isolde sat in the witness box wearing a simple gray dress, her violet eyes calm as she faced the courtroom. Theron sat in the front row, Kieran beside him. Sage sat on Isolde's other side, having been sworn in as her legal advocate. Justice Stone raised her gavel. "We are here to render judgment on charges of conspiracy, kidnapping, attempted murder, illegal human experimentation, treason against the Western Alliance, and the murder of Alpha Draven Kale." She looked at Isolde. "Miss Marek, you may present your testimony." Isolde stood. She didn't use notes. She didn't need them. "I was 8 years old when the experiments began," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "My father, Dr. Lucian Donovan, told me they were vitamins, special medicine to make me strong." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing the inside of her arm. Hundreds of tiny scars, each one from an injection, created a horrific pattern from wrist to elbow. 156 injections over 6 years, she continued. Each one contained a cocktail of genetic material designed to make my body compatible with werewolf essence. My father was preparing me to survive ambrosia exposure. When I was 14, she went on, her voice steady. My real father, Marcus Thorne, discovered what was happening. He tried to stop it. My mother, Counselor Maris, killed him, made it look like a lab accident. Maris's face remained impassive, but her hands clenched in her lap. "I escaped when I was 21, Isolde said. Changed my name, hid for 3 years, until they burned down the shelter to flush me out, until they used an 11-year-old child as bait." She looked directly at the defendants. "They created me to be a weapon, a prototype for an army of hybrids they could sell to the highest bidder. I refuse to be that weapon, but I will be their reckoning." She sat down. Justice Stone nodded. "Dr. Gideon Cross, please approach." The pack physician stood carrying a thick folder. "I have evidence," he said, "that the royal ambrosia was stolen from Ashford vaults 4 months ago. Only council members have access to those vaults." He presented fingerprint analysis. Maris's prints. On the vault door. On the ambrosia vials. Next, Sage Marek stood. "I am employed as an analyst for the Alliance Council," she said. "Over the past year, I've documented irregular financial transfers totaling $47 million from a shell company owned by Alpha Marek Stahl to an account controlled by Dr. Donovan." She presented bank records, emails, encrypted communications, all of it pointing to a conspiracy. Celeste Winters approached next. She looked smaller than she had at the gala, her usual confidence replaced by nervous determination. "Silas Vane recruited me to spy on Miss Marek," she admitted. "He promised me a position in the new regime if I helped discredit her. I planted listening devices. I sabotaged her dress. I'm sorry." She presented recordings. "Silas coordinating with Draven, plans to poison the Frostbite Alpha and frame Isolde. Discussions of how to seize control of the Western Alliance." Finally, Kieran stood. The 11-year-old walked to the witness box with his head high. "They kept me in a freezer," he said, his voice small but clear. "Alpha Draven's men. They said my brother didn't want me anymore, that I was worthless." He looked at Isolde. "But she saved me. She died for me, and she came back. If she's a monster like they say, then I wish there were more monsters in the world." The courtroom erupted in applause. Justice Stone had to bang her gavel 3 times to restore order. The evidence is overwhelming, Justice Stone declared. We will now render verdicts. She looked at each defendant in turn. Elder Voss Hargrave, guilty on all counts. Sentenced 35 years federal imprisonment. All assets seized. Alpha Marek-Stahl, guilty on all counts. Sentenced 30 years. Mining operations dissolved. Silas Vane, guilty on all counts including attempted regicide. Sentenced life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. Dr. Lucian Donovan, guilty on all counts including murder, torture, and crimes against humanity. Sentenced life imprisonment, maximum security. Scientific credentials permanently revoked. Counselor Maris Donovan, guilty on all counts including murder of Marcus Thorne. Sentenced life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. Pharmaceutical empire dissolved, assets seized. Alpha Draven Kale, posthumously found guilty of kidnapping and attempted murder. Estate forfeited $18 million transferred to Victims' Compensation Fund. She banged the gavel one final time. Total assets seized from the syndicate, $247 million to be distributed to victims and PAC welfare programs. Then Justice Stone stood. This trial has exposed systemic corruption at the highest levels of our government. Therefore, by order of the High Court and with unanimous approval of the Alliance Council, we enact the following reforms. She read from a scroll, the Hybrid Protection Act. All wolf-human hybrids are granted full citizenship and PAC rights. The Omega Protection Charter. No Omega may be sold, traded, experimented upon, or forced into service. The Council Transparency Act. All council finances to be made public. Term limits of 10 years maximum. The Alliance Oversight Act. Independent auditors will review all council decisions quarterly. The crowd erupted in cheers. Justice Stone raised her hand for silence. Finally, we addressed the matter of Miss Isolde Merrick's status. The room went silent. Miss Merrick survived the audit. She demonstrated powers that exceed most alphas. She has shown courage, integrity, and mercy even toward those who sought to destroy her. Justice Stone looked at the assembled council members. All in favor of recognizing Isolde Merrick as Luna of the Ironwood PAC, signify by voice. A chorus of aye filled the hall. Any opposed, silence. Then by unanimous consent, Justice Stone declared, Isolde Merrick is recognized as Luna. Let all territories bear witness. She smiled, the first genuine warmth Isolde had seen from her. Welcome to your throne, Luna Isolde. 6 months later, the Ashford estate gleamed in the morning sun. The damage from Theron's dramatic entrance had been repaired, the walls reinforced, and the entire complex expanded to include a new wing, the Thorne Memorial Center for Hybrid Support. Isolde stood in the center's main hall, surrounded by photographs. 15 shelters across 4 states, all funded by the seized syndicate assets, each one bearing a plaque in memory of Oak Hollow and all those who sacrificed for others. You're brooding again, a voice said. Isolde turned to find Sage walking toward her. Her sister had moved into the estate 3 months ago, taking a position as Alliance liaison. She'd also married Kate Brennan in a small ceremony last month. Just thinking, Isolde said. About how much has changed. 6 months ago, I was nobody. Hiding, waiting to be found. And now I run the Western Alliance's largest support network. I have a sister I thought was dead. I have a child who calls me mom, even though I keep telling him it's more complicated than that. She smiled. And I have a mate who still asks permission before kissing me, even though we've been bonded for months. Speaking of which, Sage said, glancing at her watch, the ceremony starts in an hour. Isolde's stomach fluttered. Right, the mating ceremony. It had taken 6 months for Dr. Gideon to confirm that Isolde's hybrid body could survive the mating bite. 6 months of testing, of research, of careful preparation. Tonight, in front of the entire PAC, Theron would mark her, and she would mark him in return. She found him waiting in their private quarters. He wore traditional ceremonial robes, but he looked nervous in a way she'd never seen before. Second thoughts, Isolde asked. Theron crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. Never. I've waited so long for this. To bind my life to yours. To make you mine in every way that matters. I'm already yours, Isolde said softly. The bond did that 2 minutes after we met. Not in every way, Theron said. The mark is permanent, unbreakable. It will change your scent, your status, everything. There's no going back. Isolde reached up, cupping his face in her hands. Then it's a good thing I don't want to go back. I want to go forward. With you. As equals. Always equals, Theron murmured, echoing the promise he'd made months ago. The ceremony took place on the cliff overlooking Ghost Pine Forest. 600 PAC members gathered, their voices raised in traditional songs. The sun set behind the Iron Ridge Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. Theron knelt before Isolde, the Alpha King kneeling before his Luna, a reversal that made the crowd gasp. Isolde Merrick, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled wolves. I kneel before you as a man, not a king. I ask you to bind your life to mine, to walk beside me, as partner, as equal as mate. Will you accept my mark? I will, Isolde said. On one condition. The crowd held its breath. You bind yours to mine the same way, Isolde continued. Equal in all things. No king without his queen. No queen without her king. Theron's eyes blazed gold. Agreed, they bit simultaneously. Theron's fangs sinking into the junction of Isolde's neck and shoulder. Isolde's elongated canines, a gift of her hybrid transformation, piercing Theron's throat. The mate bond, already strong, exploded into something that felt like being struck by lightning. Gold light erupted from both of them, visible to every witness, a beacon that could be seen for miles. When they pulled back, twin marks glowed on their skin, permanent, unbreakable. The pack howled, 600 voices raised in celebration and acceptance in joy. Kieran, now fully comfortable, shifting between forms, ran up in his human shape and threw his arms around both of them. Does this mean I can officially call you Mom now? He asked Isolde. She laughed, ruffling his hair. I suppose it does. The celebration lasted until dawn. Music, dancing, feasting. Wolves from all 12 territories came to pay their respects to the Luna, who had risen from death. As the sun rose, Isolde found herself on the same cliff where they had held the ceremony. The pack had dispersed, heading to their homes for much-needed sleep. But Theron had found her as he always did. They stood together, watching the dawn paint the forest in shades of pink and gold. Do you ever regret it? Theron asked quietly. The fire, dying, everything that came after. Isolde thought about it. The pain, the fear, the transformation. Then she thought about Kieran's laugh, about Sage's fierce loyalty, about the shelters they'd built, the hybrids they'd protected, the laws they'd changed. About the man standing beside her, his hand warm in hers, his heart beating in perfect synchronization with her own. No, she said finally, I don't regret it. I died that night in Oak Hollow, but I came back as someone stronger, someone who could make a difference. She turned to face him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dawn light. They tried to make me a weapon, she said, but I chose to be a shield. For the broken, the forgotten, the ones who think they're worthless. Theron pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. You're more than a shield, he murmured. You're a revolution. Below them in the valley, smoke rose from morning cooking fires. Children played in the snow. Life continued, ordinary and precious and safe. Safe because a young woman had chosen sacrifice over escape. Safe because an alpha king had chosen love over pride. Safe because sometimes the things that should kill you make you stronger instead. Isolde Merrick Luna. Isolde Ashford now smiled as the sun cleared the mountains, bathing the world in light. Power doesn't always roar, she said softly, echoing words she'd spoken long ago. Sometimes it rises from ashes. Theron kissed her temple, and sometimes, he added, it dies to be reborn. They stood together as the new day began, two souls forged in fire, bound by love, ruling not through fear, but through sacrifice proven and justice earned. The Omega who had died for a king had become a queen, and the pack she protected would tell her story for generations to come.